So, when China launched its latest massive military exercises, basically surrounding Taiwan, the internet, as you can imagine, absolutely exploded. But what were people really saying underneath all the noise? Well, we decided to dive deep into one of the biggest Reddit threads on the whole thing to see what that conversation actually looked like.
And you know, when you sift through thousands and thousands of comments, the entire massive conversation really just boils down to one super tense question. Is this just more political saber rattling, or is this the dress rehearsal for the real thing? The reaction was split, like right down the middle.
Right off the bat, the thread just split into two completely different camps. On one side, you had people pointing out this chilling parallel to Russia's so-called exercises right before the Ukraine invasion. But on the other side, you had users saying, look, China does this all the time, it's happened over and over, and it's never led to war. But no matter which side they were on, the conversation very quickly zeroed in on the one thing everyone agreed on, the absolutely enormous economic stakes.
This comment, it just perfectly captures the nervous, sarcastic energy of the entire thread. It sums up the immediate fear, right? The world's most critical, most essential industry is sitting right in the middle of a geopolitical tinderbox. And this all revolves around a concept that came up again and again in the discussion, the silicon shield.
Okay, so what is this silicon shield? Basically, it's the theory that Taiwan's complete and utter dominance in making advanced semiconductors is its own form of protection. The thinking is that any conflict would be so catastrophically bad for the global economy that nobody, not even China, could actually afford to pull the trigger. And as tons of users pointed out, we're not just talking about any old chips here.
You have to understand, the entire world runs on what Taiwan makes. We're talking about the crazy powerful GPUs that are fueling this whole AI boom, the chips inside your smartphone, your car, even your washing machine. And it's not just stuff for us. We're talking about advanced weapon systems, airplanes. They are all completely dependent on these chips. A shutdown in Taiwan would bring the global economy to a screeching halt. But some users took this theory a step further, into some much, much darker territory.
Yeah, this comment reflects a really widespread theory that popped up in the thread, that the chip factories, the multi-billion-dollar fabs, are essentially rigged to be destroyed. The idea is that Taiwan and its allies would rather blow these facilities to kingdom come than let them fall into Chinese hands. It creates this kind of mutually assured economic destruction.
All right, so let's put the economic doomsday scenario on pause for a second. What about the military reality of it all? Could China actually pull off an invasion or even a blockade? Well, the armchair generals of Reddit got to work on that exact question. And let me tell you, the debate was fierce.
And just like before, you had two totally opposing camps duking it out. A lot of people were arguing that an amphibious invasion is one of the hardest, most complex military operations you can possibly attempt, and that China just doesn't have the experience. But others immediately pushed back, saying, are you kidding? China has been planning this for decades. They're just waiting for the absolute perfect moment to make their move.
So people started digging into Taiwan's defense. And they brought up some really interesting points. There was speculation that Taiwan is building a huge fleet of water drones, taking a page right out of Ukraine's playbook in the Black Sea. They also talked about the disembarkment penalty. That's the massive advantage you have as a defender when an enemy is trying to land on a hostile beach. And of course, there's the big one. The belief that no matter who's in the White House, the Pentagon would push hard for an intervention. And a bunch of people were quick to point something out that's actually super important. A blockade isn't some kind of peaceful option. To actually enforce it, China would have to start firing on ships from all over the world that are trying to get to Taiwan. And boom, you've instantly got a global crisis, which of course brings geopolitics into the mix.
A lot of the discussion wasn't even about ships or tanks. It was about politics, specifically American politics. This idea was a really common thread. A lot of commenters seem to think that the biggest factor in China's whole calculation is the political climate in the US. They see a potential second Trump administration as being less likely to get involved, creating what they called a perfect opportunity for an invasion. But hey, even if there's no military response, what about sanctions?
So what about the big economic weapon? Could the threat of sanctions, like the ones against Russia, be enough to stop China? Well, surprise, surprise, Reddit was completely divided. Some people were convinced it would grind China's economy to a halt, but way more people called that a pipe dream. Their argument? China is the world's factory. Sanctioning them would be like an act of economic suicide for the West, too.
And this is where things get really scary, because people started mapping out the ripple effect. They predicted a conflict like this would never stay contained. Japan, for instance, would almost certainly get involved, because a Chinese-controlled Taiwan would be a huge strategic threat to them.
Some even worried that North Korea might see it as the perfect distraction to attack South Korea. And pretty much everyone agreed that the result would be a global recession that could make the shock of COVID-19 look tiny.
So once the conversation shifts to, a potential global meltdown that affects every single one of us, the whole tone of the debate just changes. It moves away from cool, detached military analysis and into a much more personal, emotional, and frankly anxious place.
And then you see comments like this one, and it just hits you. It really captures this feeling of dread. It's that sense of exhaustion and just helplessness from watching yet another massive global crisis start to brew, like history is speeding up in a really scary direction.
So, how do you even cope with that level of anxiety? Well, for a lot of people, the answer is dark humor. References to the post-apocalyptic show Fallout were everywhere. One user even called it a training video at this point. It's a way to try and process something that feels totally unthinkable, through the lens of pop culture.
Then there's this comment, which is a throwback to a really old internet meme. And honestly, it might be the most relatable sentiment in the entire thread. It just screams exhaustion. It's that feeling of being completely worn down by a constant stream of crises, from pandemics to wars to economic chaos. People are just tired.
But then, a comment like this just cuts through all the noise. Someone who says they're actually from Taiwan chimes in and points out that for them, this isn't some new, shocking crisis. This has been the background noise of their entire life. And that constant threat hasn't led to panic, but to this kind of weary, tired resignation. And that feeling of here we go again led some users to this really interesting and kind of terrifying theory. They argue that these constant drills aren't just for practice. They might be designed to make everyone complacent, to bore us into submission, so that when the real invasion finally kicks off, the world's first reaction is just, oh, it's just another drill.
So at the end of the day, after all the arguments about economics and military strategy and all the anxiety, what are you left with? It's this feeling, this deep, uneasy feeling that the world's major powers are shifting, tensions are climbing, and everyone is just holding their breath, watching, and waiting. And it all comes back to that one single question that no one can answer, the question that was really at the heart of this entire online conversation. With every new drill, with every warship that appears on the horizon, at what point does a rehearsal stop being a rehearsal and become the real performance?